um, people from varied faculty courses have come here. So someone has come from engineering, someone has come from commerce, different arts as well. So the idea of behind starting this lecture series perspective was to invite prominent development practitioners and know their perspective about different issues that our society, our economy is facing, and to know their perspective and to increase our knowledge about this perspective. That is why, along with Asim sir's support, the students could start this perspective exhibition. And now, without consuming further time of the lecture, I would ask the chair of the session, Dr. Pankaj Seksharia, to introduce the speaker. Please welcome.
Thank you, Dhawan. All of you, I'm hoping you have seen the circular that went out introducing Professor Balasubramaniam, but I mean, it's my great pleasure and duty as well to kind of introduce formally. So, Professor Balasubramaniam at the moment is Director Research at the LV Prasad Eye Institute in Hyderabad, which is one of the country's and perhaps the world's leading eye research and eye treatment hospital. He has, as would be expected, visiting faculty positions and a number of other experiences in other parts of the world in a number of universities. I perhaps we don't know the details of all of them. He has a background in chemistry, so he's actually a scientist. He was awarded a PhD in chemistry from Columbia University in the USA in 1965. And I was just telling him as we were chatting was that perhaps none of us in this room was even born when he did his, I don't know, Asim, 65. He finished his PhD in 65. So there you are. Another very nice coincidence is I was asking him about him on the campus, and there's also a statement on his experience and what he knew Dr. Rodam Mistry personally. So the lady after whom this campus's name was somebody Professor Balasubramaniam knew very well. What it is like to add over here, I think in my personal experience of understanding and knowing him is that in him there's a very interesting combination of a scientist, a science administrator and a science communicator. So he writes a regular column for the Hindu every alternative Thursday, which I'm sure many of you, it's called Speaking of Science, your column Speaking of Science, which is a very, very interesting series that introduces science to the common public. It's worth reading both for the way it is written but also for the subject matter that is there. He's also the winner of the UNESCO Kalinga Award for Science Communication. So without much ado, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we're really looking forward to what should be a really fascinating and challenging and hopefully a provocative lecture. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So whatever you're comfortable with.
When Pankaj asked me to come and give a talk here, largely about what we view science and technology as these days. And that's important. I gave the title, Why is Science So Reactionary? Already. Yes. The word reactionary here is used essentially as a negative sense. In a sense that actually this is one of those things we would rather not have, because it does more negatives than positives. It can also be thought of in another way. It's reactionary in the sense existing paradigms of thought are somehow challenged. And they are challenged in a manner that you will actually have a brand new set of ideas that you had to work with. So you can see the conflict. On the one hand, you have a tradition that tells you lots of things. On the other, you have no, that's not the best thing to do. We actually have alternate points of view, and I think ours is provable, yours is just a myth. So you can see that there is a tremendous clash that occurs between traditional thought and scientific thought. Nothing new. It's not something that happened today, not when none of you were born, when I got my PhD in 1965. One nice thing about this, keep on people keep on reminding you that you're old. Even when I was a youngster, there was all this question that I raised. Just look at India. For many of us, India really is India post-1947. There was a completely different set of attitudes, ideas, models and so on that we began using for the entire country. Some of them were truly revolutionary. I'm not sure they could be done today. One man, one vote. Is it even possible to think of something like this today? Just think about that. Would it have been possible had Gandhiji not been there, or Nehru not been there, or Ambedkar, Patel, any of these people who are the forerunners of modern thought? We could never have had that. So already there is something very revolutionary that we don't realize this. But this business of one man, one vote is what gave you 67-3 in Delhi just yesterday. You couldn't have had it otherwise. There was even this question, remember, even today it was raised. Should there not be a minimum education qualification to vote or to hold office? Many of our own parliamentarians, MLAs and MPs and so on do not have proper education. That doesn't mean they do not have proper wisdom. So there is this argument that will keep on going. One that will hold on to what has been for years and years the practice, and the other that suddenly questions this. May not even question it. It may be one where, well, how about trying this? The other thing, 1947, I'm pointing this out because it's very important. Post-war, remember there were 2 world wars? Second World War ended in 1945, 46, around that time. It was really a fantastic moment because at the last count, as many as about 90 countries suddenly became independent of colonial rule. 90. Some countries were actually born, they didn't exist. And countries were made just using paper and pencil. Jordan, Iraq. Jordan didn't exist. And yet, because there was a political thing that we had to make West Asia in a particular manner, must make Israel, that kind of a thing, new countries were actually born. In any event, what 90 such countries became independent. Just one country decided that they will make friends with science. No prize for who that country is. Right? And there was also a rather interesting point that Pandit Nehru made at that time. He said development requires that we use the fruits of science, essentially technology. I also want to make that distinction here. Science as opposed to technology, or science that breeds and creates new technology, or science that explains existing technology. And what Nehru said was, we will make friends with science. What he meant at that time was not only we will create scientific institutions of whatever value they are going to be, but also we will use the fruits of science. And remember when he opened the Makaranagar Dam, he even said these are the modern temples of India.
Temples of modern India.
Temples. Interesting idea, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, it's already a challenging word because a temple has something completely different in terms of what it carries as a meaning. That was a challenge already because what it really meant was, maybe in his mind, what he meant at that time really was, I shall no longer use the existing methods. I may honor them, I may not honor them, but I am going to try a brand new method, a brand new process of thought and so on. That happened. It happened in a manner that we said the most important thing. It's the same thing. Aam Aadmi said exactly the same thing. Pani chahiye, bijli chahiye. Okay, I need power, I need peene ka pani, I need stuff to eat and so on. This was essentially the same idea that Nehru had. And we had Makranangal Dam. We already planted the seeds of the Green Revolution. Remember again, I was born at that time. I was born in 1939. So I actually went through, without realizing, went through the process of India becoming independent. And suddenly there was such hope and there was such a positive atmosphere around the country that we didn't even realize at the same time one of the ideas of India was to use vaccination. The smallpox vaccine, it was a global effort. There were no cars, there was no phones, there was not even electricity, an occasional bus and so on. And yet, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from all the way from Gujarat, Porbandar, all the way down to the Burmese border, people actually walked or took a train or whatever and inoculated close to 300 million people. All this was done in about 10 years. What I am talking about here is therefore technologies of this kind actually were used. There was objection. There's objection even today. There are countries that do not accept vaccination. America, okay, the real epitome of whatever you have as science and technology and so on. There are states in America that actually say we do not want vaccination. Okay, so there is this kind of opposition and so on. So what causes this kind of counter argument and so on? This is really what I want to clear. It's reactionary in two senses. One opposes traditional thought, and the other brings back a brand new model of human development. Again, I said this is not new. It's not new because until that time, until 1500, the entire world thought that we have the center of the universe is Earth. Okay? And here is a man who looked at using the telescope and so on. And he said, this doesn't seem so. It looks more like that we are running around the sun. The heliocentric universe idea came from Galileo Galilei. What happened to him? Done to death. Okay. You will retract what you are saying because it goes against traditional thought. At that time, almost religious thought. Therefore, you will withdraw what you said in order to save your life. He didn't do that. And they killed him. I remember the last one he said. And yet it moves. Reactionary again. Same way, some of these thoughts that are common sense doesn't tell you. Common sense can actually oftentimes be essentially thought of as the same as what everybody thinks. The very word common sense really is the man in the commons thinks along these ways. Maybe right, maybe wrong. It's the same kind of a thing happened. Not only with him, fortunately, the preacher, okay, Gregor Mendel, did not go against existing thought, but Darwin did. Darwin wasn't killed because by that time, I think what they call the age of enlightenment and so on came. But even today, remember, Darwin's ideas are turning out to be a great problem. Why is that? What did Darwin say? He said, over time, random things happen in your body that change leads to generational changes of a given property. Is that okay? He didn't call it genes and so on. But he certainly said, over time, in a population of animals, plants, whatever, life forms, there will be an occasional change that happens to one or two individuals, in a manner that when that individual procreates and produces further generations, this error will keep on continuing. So you'll now have two kinds of animals. One that is the traditional one that is a mutant one. And depending on how quick you are in making children and how you adapt yourself to the existing circumstances, you may win or you may lose. In the case of microbes, germs, bacteria and so on, their reproduction time is hardly an hour or two. Therefore, your own bacteria decides to reproduce either sexually or non-sexually. In a couple of hours you will have 2. Then you will have 4. Then you will have 8. By the time you pass the day, you probably will have 1 million. Within a month, that's it. And if there is one error that actually sustains like this, or because of that error, I am going to have a slight advantage over the rest of the population, this will prevail. This is in effect what Darwin said. Okay? And he called it actually the law of natural selection. Okay? It also meant I don't need God to create me. He didn't say that quite, but that's exactly what it meant. These are random. These are not programmed by some divine will and so on. Imagine how difficult a thought of this kind is going to be. Even today, many countries do not accept because they find it uncomfortable based on what the prevailing religious or faith-based views are. I'm so happy the present government hasn't thought about Darwin yet. If they do, we'll all have to fight. But it's important because lots of other things are happening. Or if even government or population group might even say, this is all known. It's been written. That kind of a thing. So ideas of this kind turn out to be rather reactionary. How many of you believe that Darwin is wrong? How many of you believe he is right? How many of you think I don't give a damn? How many of you really think that it doesn't really matter? So you're taking a point of view.
So it again depends.
Yes, tell me why.
It again depends upon the school of thought a person is from. If he is a conservatist, he will feel that Darwin is not right. If he is a liberal, he will feel, yeah, Darwin is right. So
I'm asking about people who don't give a damn. See, so you have to take a point of view. If you take a point of view, that means you're really bothered about what he said and you think he is right. Or this is yet one of those fringe elements that has decided and is obviously going to be wrong. Okay? There's an outstanding, very easy to read biologist. I think you all should read that, Richard Dawkins. Okay? There was a big debate during Darwin's time, immediately after Darwin's time, about is Darwin right or wrong. And the argument was not between Darwin and the clergy, but one of his followers and the clergy. So this bishop of whatever, I think Wilberforce is the name. He said, tell me, do you come from your grandmother's side or the grandfather's side who was a monkey? Did you derive your phylogeny or your ancestry from a monkey? Is that what you want me to believe? And the answer was yes. So do I, and so do you. Difficult thought. It's a difficult thought because we've been told in our religious belief that we are all sons and daughters of God. Suddenly it turns out God is not needed. Much of scientists today, I won't say much, a significant number of scientists today actually don't give a damn whether God exists or not. Because for them, it is not necessary to have the concept of God and what all God does in order to explain ideas of science. That is reactionary again. And there are scientists like me. I grew up in a very traditional Tamilian Brahmin family. Those of you who are Tamilian Brahmins will know, or even Telugu Brahmins will know, how punishing the daily schedule can be.
Even in this generation. Maybe not in this generation.
How many in this generation do morning, afternoon and evening puja? See? You do.
Morning.
Twice a day.
Morning. Once a day.
It was essential that I get up at 4:30 in the morning, take a bath, do the morning puja, okay? And then noon time, and then evening. You call it Sandhya Vandanam, but it's not just Sandhya Vandanam, it is actually Pratana in the morning, and then during daytime and so on. Otherwise you don't get food, that kind of thing. It also had its advantages, not advantages, I mean there are what you may call collateral benefits. So the collateral benefits were that you had to learn a lot of language, Sanskrit and Tamil. And I am truly thankful that because of this punishing religious schedule that I had, we also had this opportunity to learn Sanskrit, one of the most beautiful languages, and Tamil, one of the most beautiful poetries that you read anywhere. Okay, now, all that disappeared when I went to graduate school, when I had MSc actually. Slowly that thing, whether it is a sudden freedom that you got because you went away from home to a college and so on, or whether it's actually the influence of the environment, friends, new idea that you pick up from learning new knowledge and so on. But after a while, I've stopped doing that. I don't even go to temples. It is not as if that I don't want to go to temples. I don't need a temple. But when my wife and children, I certainly will take them. So, in that sense, it's more of it's not an atheism, it's more like an agnostic point of view. Okay. But then there are scientists who do believe in this. I cannot criticize them because they have both the points of view and they will have difficulty in merging the two. Or you simply have two of them separately, as if there's one box that contains it, the other box has this one. Dr. Radhakrishnan is a wonderful example, who was the recent chairman of ISRO. He grew up like I grew up. He also learned music and everything just like all of us did. Okay. Before Chandrayaan, he went to Tirupati. Right?
Yeah.
My colleagues in science lambasted him. Okay. Other colleagues in science said, well, that is his Radhakrishnan as an individual, Radhakrishnan as a scientist. Okay. Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, sir.
Yes. No.
How many of you would object that he did this, that he went to the temple? Why is that, Dr. Prakash?
In a society like ours, for that matter, any other society, there can be no clear dividing line between public and private. Those boundaries are very blurred. So you see a police vehicle charging lathi charge with a Shiva, ostensibly to protect a mosque, but there is a Shiv sticker on the jeep. So the example which I am trying to give you, that this public and private is very blurred in our context. So you cannot retain your private thoughts without getting translated into public. For instance, the example of Sanskrit which you gave, how many people which are not Brahmins, not upper caste, will have an opportunity to learn Sanskrit? So it's a very tight rope walk. You cannot keep that boundaries rigid.
I take your point, but I disagree with that. In the sense, when I asked Radhakrishnan, is that I went there as an individual. I did not go as an ISRO chairman. You would say that's not true because of the position that you hold, you also project an image that is larger than the individual. Is that the point of view you take?
No, I'm saying that this is, you are not taking into account the sociology of the society. What I mean to say that when you go to a temple, it inspires a particular kind of social network, which is always handy and useful when you need certain works to be done. And Brahmin, see, other than somebody was discussing, I think Pankaj, I don't know who was even discussing, why all scientists are Tamil Brahmins, all top scientists in India. So that's a social network also.
That is a long shot because you could say this, no, you could say the same thing about Jewish, right?
All philosophers are Jewish.
So, you're accusing me of my traditional belief system which I had one time ago.
No, I'm not accusing
Yes.
you as an individual. I'm accusing you as an institution. I'm not, see that I'm ready to, if we have a personal, we have most happy. I have many students here, when I go back, they go to the temple, I drop them to the temple. I have nothing against the temple. But my point, I'm opposing it as an institution. I have nothing against an individual. Individual belief is supreme for me.
Sheldon Pollock is a rather well-known Harvard Sanskrit scholar. He is not a Hindu. He doesn't do Sandhya. And yet, he is one of the sharpest minds who can translate things in Sanskrit. No institution.
That's a profession for him.
Hmm?
That's a professional exercise for him. In India, when we learn Sanskrit, we can only have access, not in the recent times, but we can only have access to the language if we are born Brahmin.
That's not true.
That's true. That's true.
That was true.
It used to be true. Sheldon Pollock is not
Dr. B.R. Ambedkar for the example.
Ambedkar.
Yes,
Yes.
because his father want to
Yeah. Go ahead.
Ambedkar father wanted.
Here is somebody,
Yeah.
everybody should
If
speak.
you are going to tell me that the institution that debarred other people from learning Sanskrit, I am against that institution. Let me make that clear. Okay? I do not belong to that institution. I partook of the benefits of the institution. That's true. It's quite like saying you are going to the IIT or IIM or TISS. Chosen people. You guys all went through some exam or something, other interview and so on. So it's already handpicked. He can object with exactly the same. The institution called TISS is so different from the institution called Osmania University or Kakatiya or something. Would that hold water?
Sir, but over here, all of us were given an equal opportunity to be a part of this institution when we entered an exam. You were born into a certain family which gave you the opportunity to become a part of an institution there. So I think that's what Asim sir is trying to say, that you were in a privileged background to be able to learn everything that you have. And so, and all your colleagues in the scientific community tend to have a similar background and all of them are privileged. So I think when you have a certain amount of when you earn a privileged position, it then becomes a prerogative to make sure that you are able to break through the barriers that exist that make you only privileged.
Agreed. No disagreement on that. Okay.
Yeah.
That society by and large has been discriminatory is one that everybody has to agree. Because not denying it is foolish. You certainly have had that. So that's, So I reap some harvest because of my genetics, right? That's really, essentially is turning out to be something of that kind. Now, but I don't, any longer don't practice that is because of a considered opinion in my own mind that I didn't do that. Okay? So in that sense, I probably broke free from that institutional bracketing. That's one way of looking at that. As to Dr. Radhakrishnan, the argument will go on. Again, but not necessarily the way that you put it. And that is, you actually were born with a silver spoon in your mouth or a silver Sanskrit book in your mouth and so on. That's different. He is a traditionalist. Traditionalist in a variety of ways. He is very good in classical Carnatic music. He's very good in Kathakali. Okay. These all tell you about his, what about his background? Okay, then you also go beyond that. The more you go beyond constricting situations, the better as a human being you are. That's, I think we are together on that one. But to say that it was denied is no longer denied now. There is a school in Sanskrit college in Osmania University campus and so on that people go to. But putting together by and large because of artificial, man-made. Okay, this is it again, the reason why many people do not appreciate modern day genetics. But modern day genetics tells you whether you're a Brahmin or a Shudra or an Arab or a native Indian or whatever, your genes are the same. One of the biggest things that has happened, reactionary thing that has happened, is the human genome decoding. 145 different tribes and population clutches and so on were collected. And they all drew blood from them, got the DNA from there. And over a period of 7 years, the DNA sequence of all these, which is the genetic heritage that you have, was determined. Lo and behold, it was a 99.9 identity. Yellow, black, white, brown, didn't matter. In Alaskan, the same genes, same genetic sequence as a Tamilian or a Japanese, something of that kind. What that meant was precisely the kind that you were talking about, and that is, you just separated people, segregated people on basis of whatever. And you segregate people and so on based not on scientific, but either on traditional, economic, political, that kind of thing. And what modern science has told you is, this is nonsense. It's not so. It's not correct. Professor Partha Majumdar, who is the director today of the National Institute of Biomedical Genetics, did a similar thing on the peopling of India. Where did we all come from? And it turns out that there are 3 major inputs, migrations into India. So what you may call a native born in India thousands and 10,000s of years ago and continue to grow in India as that tribe is very little. In fact, the argument may be that maybe there are nobody. You're all migrants. The major group came from the West Asian continent. Another group came from the northeastern continent. The third group came across the Arabian Sea. And one other thing, I don't know how many of you really, you probably know this. All of humankind was born approximately 3 million years ago. Before that, there were no humans. There's something called hominids, closest to being human. And if you look at the DNA sequence of 3 kinds of prime, the apes that you can think in terms of, they are chimpanzees, bonobos, and and you look at these apes, there is a 97 to 98% agreement, identity. What about the other 3%? Does it make us completely different? The answer is no. Because when you look at the DNA sequence, you keep on looking at that sequence. What does this entire sequence of, let's say, 10,000 bases mean? That means one gene. That gene means one property that you inherit, whether it is diabetes, whether it is obesity, whatever, or that kind of a thing. In order for a gene to act, you actually need a trigger, what you call a promoter. Okay, the promoter turns on and the gene can actually be translated into a protein, which does all the act. The 97% identity, the 3% non-identity, the genes were there, the promoter wasn't there. Okay, there's some mutation that has happened. So you trace your ancestry now, like when the Bishop of Wilberforce challenged, do you get your monkey background from your grandmother or grandfather? All of us do. And you can actually date the time that this was done. Again, it's a reactionary thing. Because the moment you say, whether you're a Brahmin or a Shudra, you're all made of the same genetic material. What you then have is a cultural, biological separation, and not. And you can also separate, like he argued, I'm a Brahmin and therefore I can go to the temple. Or I have some of these privileges. Or I'm a Kshatriya, so I can do this. You're a Shudra, you're a Dalit. You're prohibited from doing things sociologically. That doesn't stand water anymore. This is, I think, one of the biggest lessons we have learned by looking at the human genome sequences. I think some of these are very important. But there'll always be this struggle between traditional thought and the modern thought. Some of them are reactionary, some of them are unacceptable in the traditional manner and so on. But I think wisdom lies in looking at these. Then there is other class. You want to actually bring it together in a manner that, I know all this is right. Actually, we knew it a long time ago. Which happens in certain kinds of scientific ideas. Our Prime Minister is a fantastic example of this. Okay. Remember what he said? Plastic surgery was known to Lord Shiva. Right? My question is, Lord Shiva was foolish. He could actually take Ganesha's own head and put it over there. Why an elephant? Okay. On the other, if you actually say this thing, that Lord Ganesha was actually made in this particular manner, what you have done is essentially, in effect, you have actually, in some way or the other, at least for some of the believers, it will be in a way an insult to his divinity, because you are really bringing him all the way to the mundane levels. Okay, if Shiva was such a powerful god and so on, he would have simply created the pre-Ganesha. He didn't have to go and pick up something at that time. You can make, these are not silly arguments. We have to say this. Okay. Here is where the difficulty between mythology, legends, and what we know as today's knowledge, they clash. And when they do that, in order that I'll actually gain even more strength in my belief system, you make all kinds of artificial arguments of this kind. Mythology, legends are wonderful things. They have their own values. They have their own grammar. I can argue. Lakshmana was down there, and then somebody said, please go get that particular Sanjeevani plant. Okay, and the Sanjeevani plant was elsewhere. And in order to save Lakshmana, Hanuman goes, picks up the entire mount or a hill or whatever, flies back. Did he fly? In the context of the mythology, he was so concerned, and he decided that the fastest way I should come over. And you in a way or the other, you kind of exceed, and you also make it a little bit more dramatic sounding, and he flew. One of my professors in Lucknow came out with a beautiful joke at that one. That is, when I say, all is well, they all have gone to Ayodhya. Lord Rama has now become the emperor of Ayodhya and so on. And in the government system, there was a controller, auditor general of India, of Ayodhya. He said, Mr. Hanuman is at fault. Why? He said, he was asked to bring that. He brought the entire thing along with the Sanjeevani plant. He also brought the hill. Okay? Unauthorized. Right? Then he took the plant, he threw away the mountain. Unauthorized disposal of goods. And third, he declares himself to be the servant. Okay? Was he given airfare? Right? So some of these jokes, they just turn out to be. But the point really is, in order to make things exciting, to provide a particular level of involvement by the reader or the listener. Again, I think art was gone. During my time, there used to be something called the Katha Kalakshepam. It may even be now. Okay, this gentleman will come and he will recite any one of these tales and so on, and he will dance. He will make all kinds of remarks and again exceeding common sense and so on. But that was part of excitement. Every day you guys don't get together and dance the Bollywood dances. Another great excitement. People like it, but it is more than ordinary. It is not ordinary at all. It is actually what you may call as dismiss it as get out of exaggeration. Get the spirit of it. The spirit of a myth or a legend is that it gives you a story, it also gives you a certain level of understanding, and it probably enriches you in its own way. It has its own grammar. If you look at it scientifically, what does science demand? Science demands repetition. It must be repeatable. If I have a theory or an idea that I propose to understand something, the proof must come from elsewhere. I claim something. Professor Prakash says, I'm not sure about that, I better test the same thing using the same conditions. And he says, yeah, that's correct. Then we accept it. One man is no good. There are no high priests in science. You cannot have high priests in science. Also, you don't throw away earlier knowledge unless it completely contradicts your current understanding. But your current understanding must be such that it can also include as part of your knowledge system. So this business of repeatability or falsifiability, the science philosopher Karl Popper actually said that. One of the important things about science is falsifiability. My theory can be proven or can be shown to be false. And the second thing is anybody can question it. This is important thing. Now these are things that traditional thought will not allow. Again, it's reaction. So on one hand, for Modi or all these other believers to say that we already knew stem cells, we already knew plastic surgery and so on, is a little bit of a gap. On the other, for scientists to say this is garbage, not this particular one. Who told you that Pythagoras theorem was invented before Pythagoras? The answer to that is yes. Because there are a couple of sutras that are written there which are even today translatable. Just Bodhayana Sutra and Apastama Sutra, these They don't write equations. Everything there is in, in a couplet or a poetry mode. And people have looked at it. They did it for a completely different purpose. It turns out that Apastamba apparently wanted the positioning of the, the yagya, wherever you do the sacred fire and so on, in a manner that I should be able to see the celestial bodies in particular angles. So the poor man went ahead looking at various possibilities and wrote out an equation. But it turns out that in the equation, if we have a right angle triangle, the hypotenuse, okay, square that is equal to the sum of two squares. And that's written. So a scientist cannot say everything is garbage, because for him, the idea of probability exists in this particular case. Not in all cases. In occasional case of, for example, this Pythagoras theorem is true. The other also is, you don't need science all the time. When I started, I pointed out that science actually is a byproduct of technology. Technology came first. When we didn't have well-defined ideas on how things work and that the logic behind that, we used our own empirical system. You can think in terms of, let's say, ancient cities like Mohenjo-daro or Mayan civilization or Micronesian civilization and so on. The Mohenjo-daro and Harappa civilizations, they had fantastic town planning because you can see it. If I don't see it, if there is no proof, I will say this is garbage or this is yet another legend and so on. So falsifiability or probability comes. They did not write out their science, but they showed you that these are possibilities. And then comes the idea of how did this thing happen? What will be the idea behind it, what will be the mechanism behind this and so on, and science follows. Traditionally, technology came first. Whatever the technology. And then explanation came from science. And science, because it put this logical thought pattern in it, you could then derive further technology out of it. And today it is turning out, you had to go back again to understand today's technology. Today's technology in terms of what all we have done with respect to the climate, what we have done with respect to circuits in the iPhone and nanos and so on. So we need to go back again. So it's an interaction that happens. In that interaction, traditional thought may or may not have. I just wrote a small piece, and I think I would like to look at that in the following manner. May I read it out? Please. A couple of hundred words. Please. Because there has been quite a bit of debate in India about this, Shiva and how Kunti produced children. Okay. Again, you see, this is, would you take it literally? Okay, so that's important. The well-known sociologist Romila Thapar wrote about that. Legends are important, mythology is important. They have their own grammar. They have their own, space in the human civilizational system and so on. But they may actually produce new science. She's right. Because forget about Hanuman and so on. There are science fiction stories. Science fiction stories, Superman, nonsense. Scientifically impossible. Okay. Superman and Hanuman belong to the same class. Arthur Clarke wrote that in the year 19 whatever or 2000, we'll actually have elevators and escalators to go to space. We think of elevator and escalator as today's technology. An elevator must have a button which powers the entire box upstairs, or an escalator will go by step, elevator will go by stages and so on. You may have a completely different apparatus. The idea that can we actually have a space elevator has come about true. It doesn't look like your today's elevator, but it looks like I can actually shoot myself using a launcher, go on to a space station which is 40 kilometers above. Any of you who have $5 million can actually do that today. That's one stage. From there, you can go on to the orbiter. So, Arthur Clarke's idea that they'll be able to go to space beyond the atmosphere, the stratosphere, and so on, by using similar apparatus like an elevator and escalator has come true. So occasionally, such extended thoughts, what today appears impossible, can actually breed new science. So I think this is important. I just wrote, there's been quite a debate during the last several weeks about science in ancient India. On the one hand, unverifiable claims are being made that many of modern day ideas, discoveries, and inventions in science, for example, stem cell biology, but already known and practiced centuries and even millennia ago in India. Right? This is nothing but arrogance. And also an idea that we were always very good. We actually knew all this ahead of time. So we were superior to many other people. That was the basis behind some claims of this kind. On the other, outright dismissal of even claims with written material exist, like in Pythagoras theorem, astronomy, something like that. Not astrology, astronomy. That outright dismissal of even such verifiable claims has the danger of throwing the baby with the bathwater. The debate is worryingly turning political and partisan. And it's time that we people take a view on this one. Every civilization has been enriched over time through imagination, individual and collective thought and creativity. These have led to the blossoming of art and culture, mythology and symbolism, epics and belief systems which have given it identity. This symbolism is an important word here because many of these that we talk about are Superman is a symbol. Hanuman doing or something of that kind is really more a symbolism than actual truth. It may not have to be the actual truth. They have also led to developments and achievements in logic, analytical thought, and achievements in science and technology, which have offered human society improvement in daily life. As the French philosopher said, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. See, that's essentially a definition of Homo sapiens. You have sapiens, therefore you can think thoughts. Some of them are wrong, some of them are verifiable, but some of them are essentially one that will trigger newer thoughts. Imagination leading to art and crafts, literature and mythology is often not limited to what is possible, what is feasible, or familiar, or natural. Myths and epics abound in such unfettered thoughts and acts, and it is these that lend them their special character and appeal. Great poems and epics of the Indian, Greek, or other ancient civilizations have captured, triggered, and nurtured people's imagination precisely because of this feature. Look at the Mahabharata. It's a tale told and retold over centuries. So that's why we don't even know what the original Mahabharata was. What we read now is what is thought to be perhaps the most ancient text in some library somewhere. But it still captivates the modern mind. I don't know how many of you have read this fantastic book by Gurcharan Das. It's called The Difficulty of Being Good. It's a lovely book. The Difficulty of Being Good by Gurcharan Das. He used to be the head of Procter & Gamble in India. He took time off for a couple of years to go back and read Mahabharata. And he interprets it in today's. For example, he's thinking in terms of why would Ramalinga Raju who had the world at his feet do something idiotic, like cook his books. Is it so difficult to be in book? So questions of this kind that epic poems and so on actually ask us. Or the myth of Sisyphus, for example. The more you want to climb, the more it grows. The fight for antibiotics today. Today we have swine flu. Tomorrow we have swine flu prime or 2.0. Many of the antibiotics today do not work. Okay, why is that? I call that the fight, the Sisyphean fight between minds and mutations in the bacteria. It's a battle between mind and mutations. Okay, the more you think I have come to that particular level where I can kill this particular bacterium, even though it is against penicillin and fluorotoxin and so on, one little mutant there will take over. Remember, in a couple of days it will become billions and so on. So it's again a battle between mind and mutations. Such poems and epics have their own grammar. Imagination governed by rational and logical rules, because Hanuman flying is not logical. Hanuman flying is actually an example of the urgency, the speed, the commitment, the hope, and his total surrender to the point at hand. That's different. They lead to development in science and technology, making daily lives better. Science and technology have their own grammar, their own rules and restrictions. They do not allow, for example, creation of any material out of nothing. Right? Laws of thermodynamics say, okay, you can't get anything out of nothing. And yet, there could be traditional beliefs that would actually make this, but that is essentially an extension, unverifiable extension. It may add drama, but it won't add any scientific proof. Town planners, but these define the natural and the possible. Town planners, mathematicians, metallurgists, and architects of the past understood and practiced this grammar as well. Confusion and conflicts arise when, for example, the symbolism or a myth or an event in an epic, which is perfectly admissible in its own narrative and its context, is attempted to be in line with or explained using the grammar of science. Or when what is symbolic is interpreted to be literally true. Like God Ganesha and so on. Myths and symbols are meant not always to be explained by science. To do so would be an unacceptable trivialization. On the other hand, they may actually inspire science towards inventions and innovation, as I told you about the space. There need be no correspondence principle between the two systems of thought. Without science and technology, it would be a poorer world. Without symbolism and myth, it will be a duller world. Let's be enriched by both, but let them not intrude on one another. As they say, good fences make good neighbors, and that's important. Thank you.
Let me actually start by asking myself a couple of questions. I go back to the example of Dr. Radhakrishnan and the craft that went to the moon.
Right.
Or Mars, sorry. Moon and then Mars. You mentioned the grammar of science. And the understanding is that there is a certain power and a certain hegemony, if I might use a strong word, that science seems to have. So if you say something is scientific, then there is a certain belief in society and generally that then it is acceptable.
Yes.
there is something that science does, there's something in the body of science that seems to allow for that kind of power that science seems to have on human society, at least in the model, in the context of the model.
Right.
So I've got two questions there. One is when a very senior scientist, if it is a process of a certain internalization and operation of a certain way of doing things, might be the principles of falsibility or verifiability, and this internal grammar, and there is that image of the science and the scientist, then how does that reconciliation take place? When the science operates on a certain principle, but the scientist who believes and supports that rationality and that falsifiability and verifiability does not, if I might argue, does not believe in that in that system of what the science is. So that's point number one. The second question is a more instrumental question: is where do you see the interface between social science and science? In the sense that we as students here of different aspects of social science, what or is it? I mean, if science is so above everything and it is when it is rational and when it is verifiable and the falsified, then what is there to actually engage with science? So where is the possibility of actually engaging and working? What can we understand of science through social science methods, through social science processes? So two probably linked questions.
With respect to Radhakrishnan, I think he went there essentially in order to, I think, gain self-confidence in himself. Okay. This, I think, had nothing to do, it should have nothing to do with Chandrayaan or the process of sending out and so on. So it is a completely individual thing. Whether you accept it or not is our own judgment here. Whether it becomes actually a symbol of, well, you see, I'm comfortable with both. Let us all be comfortable with both. That would be wrong. Because then you are intruding on each other's territory. That would not be correct. Okay. When I asked Radhakrishnan, he said, I just wanted to get my mind clear, and the only way I can do that. Because suppose rather than do that, I sit there and meditate. Would you accept that? So there are thin lines here. Meditation is even thought of collecting your neural system in a manner that become actually not too spiky and so on. There are behavioral neurology that tells you that things like making yoga or some of these things might actually benefit you personally. For him, it was a personal benefit as an individual. But the point is taken. Are you therefore setting an example? Okay. Could you have gone without your, letting people know or getting your dharmans and so on along with you and so that's a different thing. Could you not have done the same thing at home? Nobody will ask you. So are you therefore exemplifying this dichotomy? Somehow you have brought the dichotomy together, when I'm comfortable with that. That, I think you are absolutely correct. And I agree with that point that you are really making. Okay? Because you can't set an example and show off that I am doing this. That would be enough. The second thing about what's the role of sociologists, see, there's a lot of things that have happened because of scientific development, technical development and so on. One issue that I just talked about was the human genome system. Okay. Clearly science tells you we are all the same. And yet, when you say caste system or discrimination or segregation or that kind of a thing, it is a social construct. It is not a scientific construct. The other thing, today we have a problem because of what has happened in technology, overuse of certain kinds of materials and so on. We are making the climate change. Climate change would really mean a lot of hardship to a very significant number of people. Eventually for all of us, because if it is projected based on whatever numbers you choose, regardless of whether you are overdoing it or underdoing it, it's clear that climate change leads to sea devil lies. I want to bring this point because it is no longer just a point for gossip. Maldives, the president of Maldives wanted to buy lots of property in the outback region of Australia, saying, we don't know what's going to happen 50 years from now. We'll all be completely finished, demolished. So maybe I can transport all of our people and have a new Maldives, no longer a seafaring nation. Now look at the sociology of this one. Even if it is not right, what it tells you right away is it affects the life of people in a manner that we need to control aspects of technological overuse. I'm concerned, personally as a scientist I'm concerned about the excessive use of nuclear energy in India at the cost of alternate possibilities. We're not doing anything about it. Nuclear energy can be safe. No, I'm not an anti-nuclear guy. What I'm saying is one over the other is what is happening, and that is happening for not scientific reasons. It's happening clearly for non-scientific reasons. Trade, sociology, connection between nations and so on. So somebody has to think about it. And so only you people can do this. There is also, you do all what they call Monday morning quarterbacking. After the effect, it's an American phrase, Sunday, you do all the football match and so on. Monday morning, you sit down with the coffee and say, if only he had done that. I would be the quarterback. If I were the quarterback, I would have done blah, blah. I'm sure you're going to do this this Sunday, and India plays Pakistan. Now, but time is up.
No. Yeah.
So Monday morning quarterbacking, see, people are talking about pre-revolution was tragedy. Okay, was it a tragedy? We need to think about that. Had it actually had all this bad effect that you're talking about, how do you weigh the good versus the bad? What can you give as mechanisms for this? Okay. So sociologists will actually work as antennae. Poets are antennae. They actually think about what's going to happen in the future and so on. I think the Prime Minister of Maldives was one such. Is that just going to happen? What did I think about this? We need advice. We need counsel. We also need shackles. And that's important. Because you don't have such a... Because you're analyzing things on behalf of the society at large. You can also predict things. If it goes this way and so on. If we didn't do that, we would not have reservation policy in India. We wouldn't have affirmative action. They came not because of science, they came because of societal reasons.
Sir,
You can introduce yourself so sir knows a little bit of this line.
I'm Jyotsna and I'm in second year of public policy and governance. So my question is, it's starting from a postulate that behavioral neurology is shaped up by the sociological construct that a person faces. So in sciences we have a completely separate branch called metaphysics. There we deal about the probable nature of any entity that is being studied. So I read one of the articles by Jayant Narlikar, Dr. Jayant Narlikar. It said, what I drew from that our mind exists in two realities. When one reality is a bit down, the other one of what we have been thinking of, it gains precedence and it overshadows the earlier one, and then our mind enters into that state. So with reference to this nuclear deterrent policy, I would like to ask this thing, that while India claims that it is not following this nuclear thing and it has signed this anti-nuclear thing, but still, if somewhere in mind it would be feeling that no, had we have a nuclear thing, so that would have safeguarded our boundaries much efficiently against the neighbors or some perpetrators. So the question is all about this metaphysics thing. What do you feel on this?
I don't completely buy the Narlikar argument that you have two states of mind or two reality minds and so on. The mind is a mind. And you need, what he talks about is on certain issues or certain moments, you might want to think a little more philosophical. And in some instances, you really become far more realistic and what can I do? As problem on hand, I must have some kind of a solution and so on. It's also thought of as what physicists also call as heuristic.
Yeah.
Okay, now heuristic is it's an empirical thing. I don't know what else to do. Let me just put up an equation and see how it works and so on. It may work, it may not work. So that's the kind of an argument that he has. But going to the nuclear thing and so on, the argument is far more sociological than anything else. That is, Dr. Gopalakrishnan, who used to be the chair of the Atomic Energy Commission, Regulatory Commission, also Dr. Kalam, have argued that isn't it time that we don't any longer think in terms of uranium? We have other elements available in India, thorium. Okay, we have the technology that needs to be enhanced, developed a little better. So you have what you may call as pretty much of a supply which is completely internal. Okay. Then the argument, the other is more a political argument, that I will come, I'll put up the machine, the reactor, you people will run the reactor. Okay. If something goes wrong, the public will sue the guy who's running the reactor, not the guy who made the reactor. This is the argument that has been going on, and we seem to have signed the agreement that if something goes wrong with the reactor, the man who runs the reactor is responsible. Well, the reactor company can, or they can go and sue the manufacturer. There is some disconnect in here.
But sir, this Dr. Radhakrishnan thing, wouldn't his mind be existing in that metaphysical thing? That on one hand, he is the chief of ISRO, but simultaneously, somewhere in his mind, he is feeling that no, this thing, the traditional thing, and all the beliefs in the belief system that he has been following till now.
No, it has not overcome. One did not override the other. Had he been truly in your metaphysical manner, which is incidentally not all that scientific, it's philosophical. In that, if it had overridden the scientific task before him, he might not even have. Okay. On the other hand, the scientific problem solving, that part of the his mind was override the spiritual part of it. He might not have gone at all.
Asim?
I'm Asim. I work for the public policy department. I just wanted to put two very powerful discourse, juxtaposed to very powerful discourses. One is the discourse of science, which you started by saying that temples of modern India, anything which comes in the way of creating temples of modern India can be compromised, because the nation is the first priority. That's a very powerful discourse. You have big dams in that name, even the interlinking of rivers which you were talking about. Then the other, that falls into this particular way of thinking. The other very powerful discourse is about religion and nationalism, which is getting more and more ascendance in the last few years. And here I'm talking specifically about majoritarianism as a religion, or Hindutva as an idea of religion. I'm not claiming that Hindutva is a religion, Hindutva is an idea of religion. So that's also a very powerful discourse. And somewhere you see that they intersect somewhere. People who support majoritarian nationalism are also the people who support that kind of rationality in the hegemonic discourse of nation first through economic growth. So how do we understand, which to me at least sounds a contradiction. So how do we understand this two powerful discourses intersecting each other?
It's an artifice. It is an artifice and it's actually being thrust on us.
Okay.
But I think that's, we should oppose it. opposite for both scientific reasons and for sociological reasons. The Hindutva ideology dictating what should happen as a national policy is unacceptable. It cannot be accepted. Then how is it any different from ISIS? The Islamic, ISIS, something they call it ISIS and so on. Or when General Zia switched the Pakistan policy, national way of governance from earlier on into it will become an Islamic state. So there are dangers in that. And I worry, I certainly worry, and I think, in fact, the idea that today the so-called, the new model of the Planning Commission doesn't have scientists and sociologists worries me. The one lone scientist there is Dr. V.K. Saraswat, the DRDO chief at one time, and so on. He's a reasonable man. But compare that with the kind of intellectuals and people, knowledge and wisdom. Now, it already appears to be a given. Everybody says very nice to have, someone like Modi because he is stopping corruption, he's doing this, that, and so on. That's a hard argument. You're also buying along with that a philosophical system that will not do India good. I could extend the same thing. While I have all my sympathy, and if I had a vote in Delhi, I would have voted for an Aam Aadmi Party. But I am concerned, what is their policy going to be? Okay, who are the people who are going to... See, this is where I think the earlier government, despite all their problems and so on, had good ecumenical mix of sociologists, economists, scientists. Vivek Devrai is one more, I think, in the...
Economist.
Yeah, he's an economist. So this, I agree with you, because I think, not only do I agree with you, I think we have to argue about this. In fact, PISS should argue about this thing, that majoritarianism shall not be the policy for the future of the country. It will have to be a considered sign.
That is one, majoritarianism is one thing, but I'm trying to also imagine
Yes.
that it's not even the, if you see the history of science and technology, I'm not a scientist, but I'm just a cursory interested in that. So the way the science and technology discourse have developed, they have a complete faith that, for instance, big dam can solve this problem. Interlinking of the rivers can solve the water problem. So there is a hegemonic faith in that kind of a science. But the people who subscribe to this science are also having, within quotes, irrational behavior which is thrown by the Hindutva ideology. So I'm saying this intersection is very puzzling. On one hand you treat people with antibiotics and all, and on the other hand you go and feed Ganesha the doodh. So this intersection, and how has this society has thrown up this kind of a very puzzling configuration, which that's what I was trying to, I fail to understand this.
You could actually extend this, Professor Prakash, to across the world. It seems to me, while we are particularly concerned about India,
Yeah, I don't know about
okay, but you notice now it's also happening. Pankaj Mishra has a beautiful book on this one. There are 2 books he has written. One that is the second one that I strongly recommend, is a wonderful writer, sociology writer, The Collapse of the Empire. How some of these non-secular, how did, for example, militant Islam come about? It's not just because of the oil. It's also because you broke my tradition, various very interesting argument that he has to make. So it appears to be a global thing, post-colonial. I have no answer because I am not a sociologist. But some of you people who have more knowledge would find that. But there's no consolation saying it's a global thing, because I am concerned that the majoritarian opinion, if it also turns out to be in synchrony with the Hindutva thing, you have lost a major important component of success of India.
Anybody else?
Good spoken word.
Sure, any other questions?